Okay, so I have in front of me here almost all of the things that you'll require for making these plates. The main recipe will involve salt, yeast extract, and either gelatin or vegetarian gelatin, depending on your preference. You need to dissolve all this in boiling water, so we've got a kettle and a bottle of water. You'll be mixing them all together in a jug using a spoon. And for the actual ingredients, you need weighing them out in scales and using some little bowls to weigh them out in. If you have small little dessert bowls like this, you can use this to actually make the plates if you don't have any. But if you want to go for the full experience, you can get some cheap plastic Petri dishes off of Amazon, eBay, or anywhere you feel like you want to go. I will leave a link to these in the description in case you want to buy them from there. No commission. In fact, all of the products here, I'm not sponsored by any of the companies involved. They're just random random ingredients bought from local supermarkets. So, first off, you need to weigh out the amount of powder you're going to be using. Okay, so the ingredients I'm going to be using for making these plates involve about 2 grams of salt, 1 sachet of this vegetarian gelatin, which is roughly 6.5 grams, and 1 gram of this reduced salt yeast extract. And that will all be dissolved in about 300 millilitres of boiling water. Okay, so now that I've got all of these ready, all I need to do is boil the water and start mixing them all together. First, I add the salt to the jug, as it's the easiest ingredient to start with, followed by the correct volume of boiling water. Once the salt is dissolved, I add the yeast extract using a mixing spoon and mix it well until everything is dissolved. Finally, I add the gelatin powder in small amounts, mixing constantly until it's dissolved. Adding the gelatin too quickly will cause it to forge large lumps that will be difficult to remove. If the gelatin does not fully dissolve, you can gently heat the mixture in a microwave to help it dissolve fully. Just remember to top up the volume with boiling water, as it will evaporate in the microwave. Okay, so now I'm back and I've got my molten mix of agar here, gelatin here. You can see it's all still liquid. I'm just about to top it up back up to 300 millilitres with boiling water. Now, one of the bits that I didn't show in the B-roll footage there was that I needed to heat up the mixture in the microwave for a good couple of minutes to allow all of the gelatin to dissolve, because it doesn't always dissolve straight away as the water cools down. But now it is all dissolved and ready to pour into plates. Now, each of these plates will hold about 20 millilitres of liquid, so with 300 millilitres in total here, we have enough for about 15 plates, give or take. Depends on how generous we are with the mixture. And hopefully I'll get this done in one take, as I don't want it to solidify before I'm finished. Although if it does solidify before you finish doing yours, you can always reheat it in the microwave. Just keep an eye on it and make sure it doesn't overboil, and top up with water back to where you should be, to make sure that your concentrations of everything are the same. So, for making one of these plates, all you need to do, take off the lid, gently pour a little bit of the liquid into it, try and get as little bubbles as possible, just so that it's completely covered the bottom of the plate. Simple as that, and repeat for all of the other plates. Simple as this. After you've mixed all of these together, what you'll want to end up wanting to do is put them in the fridge for about an hour to cool down and solidify, and then they'll be ready for you to start using. And to make sure that they work, what I'm going to be using today is a bit of baker's yeast. So the sort of thing you'll normally find in one of your supermarkets. Okay, so our hour in the fridge is up and our plates have solidified nicely. So that's them done. Now you may notice now that I am keeping them upside down with the jelly side on top, the lid on the bottom. There's the lid there. Now the reason for this is, as you can see, there is a little bit of condensation. Well, obviously well, maybe not on that one. but on some of these there is a bit of condensation. See if I can find a good example of one. Now this one here. All that water on the bottom there. Now obviously we don't want that dripping down onto the plate when we're putting stuff on it. So what we always tend to do is have the jelly layer on the top and the lid on the bottom, so the plate's upside down, to prevent any condensation or anything settling onto the gelatin layer of the plate and potentially contaminating any results that we have, adding any extra bacteria or fungi that we don't want. Okay, so the next thing will be to test that these plates are actually working. Now for that, you may have seen at an earlier point in the video, I've got some yeast, some dried baker's yeast. All I'm going to do with this, or have done with this previously, is I've just added it to a little bit of water. There's a nice cloudy tube there. So all I'm going to do is take one of these plates, this one here, move the others over to the side, and I'm going to take a cotton bud and put it in a zigzag pattern across the plate. Now, to make it so you can see how I'm actually doing the pattern, I'm just going to dry that off because it has been in the fridge and the air outside is now condensing on the plate, on the outside of it. So, I'm going to start off at one end, start off at the top, and just do a little zigzag pattern, not overlapping, just going across in that kind of a pattern. Okay, just to allow the cells to spread out. So just going to take one cotton bud, open up my little yeast solution, just going to dip it in just so I get some cells on the tip, and gently, very gently, trace over the line. We'll be incubating these plates at room temperature here, and it'll take quite a long time for it to grow. Ideal conditions for bacteria such as E. coli and fungi such as yeast, which I've got here, it's normally 37 degrees overnight. Now just to let you know how much this will grow in one day at room temperature here, I do have one extra plate that I made up last night, and that is how much growth you get in one day. Now you can't see too much about the individual cells here, so what I'm going to do is I'll get some B-roll shot of this and put it up on the screen now so that you can see how big the colonies are now, and in 2 days time I'll show you how this plate looks and how this one looks. Okay, so it's been about 48 hours since I made the agar plates, or the homemade agar plates, so let's see how they fared after we put the yeast on them. So I start off showing you the plate that I prepared the day before. As you can see, there's a lot of growth on there, a lot of individual colonies. So at the top there you can even see it's more of a streak than individual colonies. So each little dot on there, don't know how well the camera is able to pick them up, but you can see a few little dots around the edges.
For the first step in preparing our medium, we want to measure out all our ingredients. In this case, we have 2 packages of gelatin, 1 teaspoon of sugar, and our package of beef bouillon. We also have 250 ml of boiled water. Now it's really important in this case that you let the water boil for at least 2 minutes afterwards, just to make sure it's sterile. We're going to put all our ingredients in the bowl, like so. Carefully add our water. And mix until everything is dissolved.
The next step is to take your solution and pour it into something that's easier to pour. Go like this, and now we're going to transfer our liquids into our 2 shallow containers to create our petri dishes.
Once you've poured the medium into its container, cover it up with a lid or some saran wrap to keep it from getting contaminated, and set it in the fridge overnight to set. Like so. Now that our medium is finished setting, we're ready to collect our sample. We recommend swabbing your mouth or any high traffic areas such as door handles or money.
The first sample that we're going to swab is the inside of my mouth. The second is my dog's water dish. In a previous episode where we made a laser microscope, we saw tons of microbial life living in the dish. Make sure to use separate cotton swabs for each sample swabbed. Once you're done collecting each sample, gently run the cotton swab back and forth across the surface of our growth medium. Make sure to use separate dishes for each sample and leave them to grow, checking on them daily. After a few days, the first sample, which was from my mouth, started to grow small white colonies. A few weeks later, there was a lot more growth, and this is what the petri dish looked like. Now let's see how the sample that we took from the dog's water dish grew using time-lapse photography. If we compare the two samples side by side, you can see that the bacteria that was grown on each petri dish was quite different. Let's look at this experiment a little closer. The average bacterium is about 2 micrometers in size, roughly 500 times smaller than a grain of sand. By comparison, the human eye is only able to discern down to about the width of a fine human hair, which is about 0.04 millimeters or 40 micrometers in size. Therefore, the only way we can see bacteria with the naked eye is to gather a large number of them together by allowing them to grow on a suitable surface or medium. When bacteria is allowed to grow in a large group, it's referred to as a colony. Different strains of bacteria form colonies with different morphologies, which is a technical term for physical appearances or characteristics. This allows us to begin to identify the type of bacteria without the use of a microscope. In fact, this technique is often used in laboratories as an inexpensive method of identifying unknown bacterial strains. The conditions under which bacteria are grown are also of particular importance. We want to make sure we don't do anything to inhibit their growth. Think of what you do in the kitchen to keep your food fresh. You keep it cold, dry, and sometimes preserve it with substances like salt. All of these things inhibit bacterial growth, and in this case, they are conditions we want to avoid. So to encourage growth, we use a low-sodium bouillon cube as nutrients for our bacteria and keep it in a warm, humid spot. The closer you can get to these optimal conditions, the faster your bacteria will be able to grow, and the happier they will be.
Contamination. This is why we're going to need a pressure cooker in order to sterilize. And a little bit about what you can do with agar. I'll go ahead and introduce you guys to my recipe here for creating agar. One thing you'll need is our main ingredient, which is agar powder. I'm using the Telephone brand powder here. We're going to need potato flakes. These are pretty much instant mashed potato flakes that you can buy at the grocery stores. I'll show a picture of what the brand that I use here. We're also going to need corn syrup. You can find corn syrup at any of your grocery store. If you don't have corn syrup, you can also replace this for honey. We're going to want food coloring. This is completely optional. I like the food coloring. It adds color and makes it easier to see contamination. You're going to want a media bottle as well. This makes pouring the agar a lot easier. And you're also going to want some kind of a container to measure out your ingredients in. You're also going to want ketchup cups or disposable condiment cups. These are much cheaper and easier to find at your grocery store compared to petri dishes. And last but not least, you're going to want a scale in order to measure out the ratios of ingredients we're going to use for this recipe. Oh, I forgot to mention, you're also going to want a laser temperature thermometer in order to read the temperature of your agar before we go ahead and pour it. The recipe I like to use for agar involves potato flakes as our main nutrient. There's many other recipes for agar out there, but for the sake of easy to get ingredients, I chose potato flakes. All of these supplies are easily found at your grocery stores. The recipe I use is simplified to the ratios of 3:1, 3 grams of potato flakes, 2 grams of agar powder, and 1 gram of corn syrup. And all of this is going to be added into half a cup of water. You can scale this into as much as you like. For today's pour, I'll be using 12 grams of potato flakes, 8 grams of agar powder, and 4 grams of corn syrup to 2 cups of water, which is equivalent to about 400 milliliters of water. So I'll go ahead and measure out here 12 grams of potato flakes. want to try and get close to it as possible. If you're a little bit over or under, that's okay. The recipe is very flexible. You can add as much or as little ingredients as you like. I find this recipe to be very consistent in getting results for me personally. Alright, after we add our potato flakes, we're going to go ahead and tare the scale back to 0, and we're going to add the agar powder. I'm going to be adding about 8 grams of agar powder. Alright, once you get your 8 grams of agar, we're going to go ahead and tare the scale again back to 0. Last step is we're going to add about 4 grams of corn syrup. And like I said, if you don't have corn syrup, you can replace this for honey as well. If you go a little bit over or under, that's fine. It's just a general ratio. Our final step here is to add our water. I'm going to go ahead and use the media bottle here to measure out 400 milliliters of water. It's the equivalent to 2 cups of water for this recipe here. Once you have all of your ingredients together, we'll go ahead and heat this up on a pot, get this to boiling, and make sure all the ingredients are well mixed together before we pour it into our bottle for pressure cooking. So with your ingredients together in the pot, go ahead and bring the heat up to a high, wait until it starts to boil. Once it begins to boil, we want to go ahead and take it off the heat and pour it into our bottle immediately. You don't want to keep this on here for too long, otherwise it's going to overcook the agar. So right when it starts to boil, get bubbly like this, we'll take it off the heat and pour it into our bottle here. Now before we pressure cook this, I like to add a few drops of food coloring. This is going to make the agar look prettier. It also helps you spot contamination much easier when things start to grow on it. So go ahead and add about 3 to 5 drops of food coloring into here and shake it up to get it all mixed up. Alright, after we add the food coloring, screw on the cap to the bottle. Make sure your cap is unscrewed a tiny little bit so it's not 100% sealed. This is going to allow steam to get into the bottle to sterilize the agar. It's also going to prevent pressure from building up inside the bottle, which could cause it to explode or crack during the pressure cooking process. Today I'm going to be using a 22 quart Miro pressure cooker. I'll leave a link in the description of where you can get this. Any pressure cooker is fine as long as you can get up to 15 psi. That's going to be the ideal pressure that we would need in order to properly sterilize our ingredients. So for my pressure cooking process, I like to add about 3 quarts of water to my pressure cooker here. What I'm going to do is pressure cook this agar at 15 psi for about 30 minutes. After we add our water, we'll turn the heat on to high and bring this up to a boil. You want your heat on high because this will build up the pressure that's inside the pressure cooker. Once we're at optimal pressure and we've reached the 15 psi mark, we can go ahead and turn the heat down and maintain the pressure at 15 psi for 30 minutes. Here I'm making sure that the cap is loose. Afterwards, we're going to go ahead and put the lid on the pressure cooker and keep the heat on the high. We're bringing it up to a boil. I set a timer for about 15 minutes here just to make sure that it's on at a full rolling boil before we add our weight on top of the pressure cooker. So after about 15 minutes, you'll see the vent port at a full steam and you'll see the red safety lock here in the up position. So I'll go ahead and add the weight on top here and let it boil for another 15 minutes until it reaches the right amount of pressure, which is 15 psi according to this weight. Once you reach the optimal psi range, your weight's going to start shaking. This indicates that you're at the proper pressure inside of your pressure cooker. Once you reach the proper pressure, you're going to see the weight do a little bit of a dance here. I'll kind of record this and show you guys a demonstration. This is a little bit of a how-to on using a pressure cooker. So once we reach 15 psi, I'll go ahead and lower the heat down to medium rather than a high. This is going to maintain the pressure that's inside of the pressure cooker. Afterwards, I'll go ahead and set a timer for 30 minutes, and we'll come back after 30 minutes here. After 30 minutes is up, we go ahead and turn off the heat and wait until the pressure reduces down until you can open up your pressure cooker. Once it's ready, we'll take the media bottle out. Now the agar is going to be boiling hot right now, so we would have to wait until it cools down a bit before we can work with it. Agar has to be heated up past 185 degrees Fahrenheit or 85 degrees Celsius in order to start melting into a liquid state. It begins to solidify at around 85 to 100 degrees Fahrenheit, which is roughly 32 to 40 degrees Celsius. So we want to pour it before it cools down enough to become a solid. So ideally you want to be working with the agar at about 160 degrees or 140 degrees. Below there is the ideal temperature you want to be pouring your agar at. If we pour our agar while it is still boiling, you're going to end up melting your ketchup cups, and you're not going to have a good time. Alright, so next up we're going to be pouring our agar into our ketchup cups. I'll go ahead and set the oven here to 250 degrees Fahrenheit. I am using an oven method in order to pour my agar. Reason why I'm using the oven is because I'm already working in front of it. You can also pour your agar in a steel air box if you don't want to use the oven. I want to give a special shout out to Home Mycology for this tech. He does a lot of YouTube videos as well on mycology, so feel free to go check out his channel and give him some love and tell him that PGT sent you there. So before we begin our pour, I'll check the temperatures again. Make sure that we're below 160 degrees Fahrenheit before we begin to pour. So how the oven method works is you heat up your oven to 250 degrees Fahrenheit. At this temperature, it's very sterile. We crack open our oven to let the heat rise. This will push any potential contamination or bacteria up and away from our cups, and it creates a steady stream of clean, warm air space that we can work in. The ketchup cups that I use, I find them to be very sterile from the packaging. If you prefer to buy pre-sterilized petri dishes to pour your agar in, you may certainly do so. That's entirely up to you. I find these ketchup cups to be very cheap and very effective for what I need them for. So with the oven cracked here, we'll go ahead and begin our pour process for the agar into the cups. So once we pour the agar into the cups, we're going to go ahead and cover them up with lids immediately and set them aside to cool. I like to stack the cups on top of each other because while they are still warm, this is going to reduce condensation from staying on top of the lids of the cups. It's going to give you a better view into your agar cups once it's cooled. You would not be able to get rid of the condensation on the top cup of the stack, but all the bottom cups below that will have condensation removed. Something about the heat on top of the lid helps with the heat rise and helps evaporate.